What the hell do you think you're doing in my bed? The millionaire's voice shattered the silence, but the crack that followed was the sound of his palm hitting her cheek. Aurora Stone hadn't cried when Julian Sterling yelled. She didn't cry when he fired her. But walking out of that Hamptons mansion, with the stain of his handprint on her face and two little boys finally sleeping soundly behind her, that's when she realized some wounds are just too expensive to heal with a simple apology. Take a deep breath. Wherever you are right now, maybe the morning sun is coming up, or maybe it's a quiet evening. Tell me in the comments, what's the weather like where you are right now? Let that quiet moment prepare you. Because the storm that hit Julian Sterling's life was about to reveal a love story built on courage. Tap subscribe if you're ready for a narrative with real emotional weight. It all starts now. The opulent stillness of the master bedroom in the magnificent Hamptons estate was brutally shattered. "What the hell do you think you're doing in my bed?" Julian Sterling's voice cut through the air like a hammer against glass. The CEO stood framed in the doorway, his tall silhouette rigid with an explosive, consuming rage, disbelief etched into every hard line of his face. Rainwater dripped unheeded from his expensive coat. He didn't seem to notice the downpour outside or the luxurious setting around him. All his cold, furious attention was locked on the woman lying on his vast mattress, Aurora Stone, the newly hired child mentor. She shot upright, her heart hammering against her ribs, her wide eyes reflecting not the guilt he anticipated, but sheer profound shock. Curled deeply and peacefully on either side of her, the twin boys Jackson and Beau lay finally asleep, their small faces softened in a way Julian hadn't seen in months, their breathing deep and rhythmic. Jackson's favorite teddy bear rose and fell in perfect synchronization with his chest. "I can explain," Aurora said quietly, holding her hands open and calm in a gesture of absolute peace, desperately trying not to disrupt the fragile slumber of the children. They were scared. Beau started crying. Jackson got a nosebleed. They begged me not to leave them. She spoke of their genuine instability, a truth Julian was too blinded by his own pain to see. Julian, consumed by the suffocating grief over Victoria Sterling's death and his deeply rooted fear of losing the last vestiges of control over his domain, didn't allow her to finish. His fury, born from an inner chaos he refused to manage, erupted. His palm came down fast and hard, a sharp, echoing crack off the polished walls as it struck Aurora's cheek. She staggered back from the force, gasping, her hand flying instantly to the burning skin of her face. She didn't cry out. She didn't even speak a word in defense. Her eyes simply locked onto his, expressing a profound pain that stemmed more from the sudden shocking and inexplicable betrayal of trust than the physical blow itself. "I don't care what excuse you have," Julian growled, his frame tall and rigid with uncontrolled anger. "You're fired. Get out of my house now." Aurora held her ground for a stunned moment, pressing her hand to her cheek, trying to steady the breath that had been knocked from her lungs. When her voice finally returned, it was low, almost a whisper, yet firm with the untouchable truth. "I stayed because they were finally calm, finally safe." "I said, get out," Julian repeated, his jaw clenched, determined to ignore the quiet, powerful justification in her words. Aurora glanced down at Jackson and Beau, sleeping so peacefully now, as if the severe shadows that had haunted their nights had finally lifted through her presence. She leaned over gently, a final wordless act of love and commitment, and kissed the top of Beau's head, then Jackson's. No fanfare, no dramatic farewell, only a silent promise. She stepped away from the bed, picked up her worn shoes, clutching them tightly in her hand, a subtle symbol of her meager means and the dignity she possessed despite her low status, and walked past Julian without another word. He was too consumed by his rage and the brutal aftermath of his own shocking action to stop her or offer an apology. Downstairs, Mrs. Oprah, the observant housekeeper and longtime steward of the household, turned sharply as Aurora descended the grand staircase. The stark, undeniable red mark blooming instantly on Aurora's cheek spoke volumes about the violence that had transpired. The older woman's eyes widened in silent, profound shock and disapproval. Aurora said nothing, simply offering a slight dignified nod of acknowledgement to the silent witness of Julian's failure. Outside, the harsh whipping rain had softened significantly to a slow drizzle. Aurora stepped into the cool gray Hamptons afternoon. She pulled her coat tighter, clutching her meager bag and the shoes in her hand, and began the long, solitary walk toward the large iron gates. Back upstairs, Julian stood rigid and alone in the master bedroom, still breathing hard, trying to reconcile the raw, explosive energy he had just released. He looked back at the bed, his jaw tight with confusion, and then something finally registered. The deep, absolute silence. He moved closer, drawn by the unnatural quiet, the kind of stillness he hadn't experienced since before Victoria's death. Jackson's brow was smooth. There was no sign of tossing, no feverish whispering, no clammy, cold sweat. Beau's thumb was in his mouth, but his other hand lay relaxed and limp on the blanket. They were asleep, genuinely asleep, not drugged, not exhausted from crying themselves into stupor, just peacefully still, finally released from their anxiety. Julian's throat tightened painfully as the realization hit him. 14 nannies, highly paid therapists, doctors, and specialists had failed. Weeks of screaming fits and endless anxiety had been endured. And yet Aurora Stone, this humble, soft-spoken mentor he had barely known, had achieved what none of them could, offering his children their first true deep rest. And he had struck her for it. He sank down heavily onto the edge of the bed, burying his head in his hands. Shame bled into his chest like ink and water, immediately staining his core with profound regret. On the nightstand, a simple white note lay folded once. He opened it, his fingers slightly trembling. If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will. It wasn't signed, but the meaning was a heavy, inescapable condemnation. He read it twice, then again, 7 times in total, letting the full moral weight of her words sink in. His reflection in a nearby mirror looked back at him, a man hardened and consumed by grief, drowning in a desperate need for control, choking on silence and his own mistakes. The Sterling mansion was engulfed in a silence that felt wrong, hollow, and acutely unfinished, like a crucial question left brutally unanswered. It was not the comforting quiet of a soft snowfall or the gentle turning of pages in an old book. This was the silence of absence, the silence of a void. Julian Sterling sat alone in his vast mahogany study, a glass of scotch untouched beside him, utterly defeated by his own actions. Aurora's note, the final wordless judgment, lay resting on his desk. He'd read it repeatedly, letting the words carve deeper lines of shame into his conscience. Outside dusk spread heavy and cold over the Hamptons estate. Julian leaned back in his massive leather chair, rubbing his temples with trembling fingers. The ghost of the slap he delivered was still subtly etched into his skin, an internal sting far worse than any physical pain. He hadn't planned the violence. He desperately clung to the belief that it wasn't truly who he was. Yet it had happened a single destructive moment, born from raw fear, misplaced fury, and the cumulative exhaustion of 1,000 quiet failures as a father since Victoria died. He had violently hit a woman, and the specific woman whose presence had finally brought solace to his fractured home. He stood abruptly and made his way up the sweeping staircase. The hallway outside Jackson and Beau's bedrooms smelled faintly of lavender and warm cotton, a simple, comforting scent left by Aurora. A small wooden stool stood against the wall. Aurora's worn sketchbook lay neatly closed on top, placed almost intentionally as if she meant for him to find it. He picked it up. Inside were simple drawings, rough, untrained, yet saturated with profound, quiet heart. Two boys holding hands beneath a tree, the tall, imposing house with its too many windows, and a figure sitting protectively between the boy's arms stretched out like wings. Beneath it, a short caption, "The one who stays." He exhaled slowly, the words landing like lead in his gut. In the nursery, Bo stirred slightly but immediately settled back, utterly oblivious, completely free of the nightmares and tears that had defined their lives for months. Julian closed the door softly. Downstairs, Mrs. Oprah was folding napkins when Julian entered the kitchen, his expression dark with a misery that transcended mere anger. "She's gone," he said simply. "I know," she replied calmly, her voice devoid of judgment but heavy with truth. "I made a mistake," he murmured almost to himself. Mrs. Oprah raised a neutral eyebrow, offering no cheap consolation. "She was in my bed. She was in your room, Mrs." Oprah gently corrected, her voice still measured, refusing to let him twist the facts. "Because the boys wouldn't sleep anywhere else. You weren't here. I was. I heard them cry. Beg for her. She calmed them." Julian pressed his lips together, swallowing the sharp taste of denial. "I thought. I know what you thought," she cut in gently. "But you weren't thinking." The heavy silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken blame. Julian looked at the chair where Aurora had sat during lunch only yesterday. It felt like weeks ago, a lifetime past. "I need to find her," he said, the need suddenly urgent and paramount. Mrs. Oprah didn't argue or try to dissuade him. "Start with the return address on her letter, Charleston, South Carolina." Julian nodded quickly, already heading toward the hall, needing to act. Across town, Aurora sat alone on a cold, damp bench outside a train station. Her cheek still throbbed beneath the chill. In the immediate aftermath, she hadn't cried, not when he yelled, not when he hit her, not even when she walked past the front gates with nothing but her bag and the profound ache of unfinished work in her chest. But now, with her coat wrapped tight and her fingers wrapped around a lukewarm vending machine. Coffee tears finally welled. She quickly wiped them away. Crying in public was a visible vulnerability she had spent years unlearning since childhood. A woman nearby wordlessly offered a tissue. Aurora smiled her thanks and looked up at the indifferent night sky. It was cruel irony she had survived being abandoned by a foster family at age 11, endured the raw grief of losing her own son to illness, and been told repeatedly she was too soft for hard cases. But that house, those children, Jackson and Bo, they had reached and awakened something inside her, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The train pulled in with a sigh of brakes and metal. Her ticket was to Charleston, SC. Yet her heart was still upstairs in the White House in the Hamptons, where two terrified boys were finally learning the meaning of peaceful sleep. She sat back down, choosing to wait. The next morning, Julian stood in his son's room with a tray of breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast fruit, a deliberate concrete act of initial atonement he hadn't performed once since Victoria died. Bo sat up groggy. "Where's Miss Aurora?" Julian hesitated. Jackson sat up, too, his eyes immediately sharp with suspicion. "Is she gone?" Julian nodded, holding his gaze steady. "She had to leave." "Why?" Bo's voice cracked, mirroring the fragility of the piece. "She didn't do anything bad." Jackson said, his eyes narrowing. "She helped us. You saw we were good." Julian knelt beside the bed, placing the tray on the nightstand, physically lowering himself to their level. "It wasn't your fault, it was mine." Bo looked at him hard. "Did you yell at her?" Julian didn't lie. "Yes." "Did you hit her?" Jackson's voice was devastatingly low. Julian's throat tightened. He nodded once, accepting the ultimate consequence. Both boys immediately turned away, a powerful, silent, psychological punishment. Julian stayed there, kneeling on the carpet for a long time, receiving the full, deserved weight of his actions. "I'll fix it," he finally whispered. "I'll bring her back." They didn't respond, but they heard him. Later that day, Aurora boarded a local bus, not the train heading to the Compton Community Center where she used to volunteer. She needed space perspective, a reminder that the world was bigger than one house, even one that held her heart. That afternoon, she taught a writing class for runaways, telling them stories, not about Julian, but about choosing to stay when others walk away, and about knowing your worth even when others don't. When she left, there was a note stuck in the spokes of her bike. It wasn't from Julian, but it confirmed her decision. They asked for you, both of them. Aurora looked up at the orange-streaked sky, and this time she smiled. Her presence was needed. Julian Sterling did not afford Aurora Stone the common courtesy of a knock. Instead, he simply stepped into the cavernous old Compton Community Center just as the late afternoon sun began its slow descent behind the urban trees, casting long golden shadows across the worn gymnasium floor. The sound of his impeccably polished shoes on the cheap linoleum was jarringly out of place, an intrusion like the sudden appearance of a cello in the middle of a punk rock band's set. But Julian was beyond flinching at social awkwardness now. He was driven solely by a desperate need for absolution. He scanned the vast open room, spotting Aurora at the far end, crouched beside a whiteboard, calmly erasing crooked letters from a lesson plan. Around her, a tight-knit circle of teenage girls gathered, laughing and joking easily, their notebooks sprawled casually on the floor. Aurora laughed with them, her voice carrying a lightness he hadn't realized he missed. Not free of past pain, perhaps, but certainly unburdened for the moment. Julian hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding his breath until Aurora looked up and saw him standing there. The laughter died immediately, not because anyone told it to, but because something fundamental in Aurora's posture shifted abruptly, like a curtain being violently drawn mid-performance. She stood slowly. Julian walked toward her, his hands completely empty. He carried no briefcase, no lawyer's file, no formal apology letter. He carried only the immense crushing moral weight of what he had done. "I need to talk to you," he stated, his voice tight. The teenage girls looked at him warily instantly, protective, one of them stepping slightly in front of Aurora. "It's okay," Aurora said gently, and the protective girl relaxed, obeying the quiet authority in Aurora's voice. Julian glanced at the whiteboard behind her. A single indelible sentence had been written across the top. "Your voice has value even when it shakes." He turned back to Aurora. "May I?" She nodded once without emotion, leading him outside to the same lonely bench by the bus stop where she'd sat just a day earlier, hiding her tears behind a lukewarm coffee cup. "I was wrong," Julian said immediately, not allowing himself the luxury of small talk or delay. "I judged you. I reacted without listening, and I put my hands on you. That's something I will regret for the rest of my life." Aurora remained completely silent, forcing him to continue grappling with the truth. "I saw you in my space in my bed." He continued, pouring out the raw psychological root of his rage. "And I let fear speak louder than truth. That wasn't just unfair. It was cruel. Oh, you didn't believe me," she said, her voice quiet, tired, but resolute. "Even after your sons trusted me." "I know," he admitted, bowing his head slightly. She looked away towards the street. "You don't get to walk back into my life simply because you finally realized I was telling the truth." "I'm not here to clear my name," he countered, meeting her eyes. "I'm here because they asked for you, not a nanny, not staff. You." Aurora's eyes softened momentarily at the mention of Jackson and Beau. "How are they? Quiet?" He admitted the word a confession. "Too quiet?" She nodded slowly, understanding the distinction. "That's not peace. That's a wound closing over without healing." He looked down, hands clasped tightly between his knees. "I want to fix this." "You can't fix it," she said, delivering the uncompromising truth he needed to hear. "But you can start with acknowledging that what your sons need isn't control, it's connection. He exhaled the tension, releasing slightly from his shoulders. "Come back." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked the pivotal question of their future relationship. "If I say yes, will I still be staff?" He hesitated, clearly grappling with the implications of completely relinquishing his power. "No, you'll have whatever title you want. Advisor, mentor, partner." She raised a challenging eyebrow, noting the weight the word partner carried. Partner in their care. He quickly clarified, though the word lingered heavier and more resonant than he had likely intended. Aurora considered it, her gaze steady and evaluative. "Fine," she said finally, "but I have conditions." "Of course." "First, no cameras in the children's rooms." He blinked, startled. "There are none." "There were," she corrected instantly. "Last month, one nanny told me. They teach the kids that privacy isn't theirs to keep." He frowned at the philosophical depth of her reasoning, then nodded once in total surrender. "Second," she continued, "they eat dinner at the table, with you. No phones, no business." He hesitated, recognizing the demand for his precious time, but nodded again. "Third," she said, "we rewrite the house rules together, with them." He stared at her, genuinely perplexed. "Jackson and Beau are 5, he protested. "They're people." She replied simply, and for the first time a small, genuine smile, a crack in his stern facade, appeared. "Anything else?" She took a deep, steadying breath, laying down the ultimate non-negotiable moral standard. "Yes, the next time you raise your hand to someone who doesn't deserve it, anyone, I'm gone, and I won't come back." His expression fell, confirming the chilling gravity of her boundary. "Understood." She stood, signaling the end of the negotiation. "I'll see them in the morning." He stood too. "Do you want to ride?" She shook her head, maintaining her independence. "I'll take the bus. I still have to finish up here." He nodded, the weight of his own failure pressing down. "Aurora, thank you." She paused. "Don't thank me yet. We're starting over, Mr. Sterling, and this time I'm not walking on eggshells." She turned and walked back into the Compton Community Center, leaving Julian alone at the curb. That night, Julian cleared the massive dining table himself. He called his sons downstairs, a novel act. He sat between them with a bowl of spaghetti and awkwardly tried to tell a bedtime story, getting the names wrong and using a voice that was far too formal and stiff. They laughed at him, not unkindly, just honestly, a genuine human connection he hadn't experienced since before his marriage fractured. Upstairs in their freshly made beds, Jackson whispered to Beau, "She's coming back." "How do you know?" Beau asked quietly. "Because she said goodbye," Jackson replied, pulling the blanket over his head. "Nobody else ever does." The morning Aurora returned to the Sterling estate in the Hamptons, the sky was a soft wash of peach and slate blue. Birds fluttered along the manicured treetops, and the lawn glistened with dew. She paused at the great iron gates before they silently swung open, gripping the straps of her worn canvas bag like armor. Everything looked the same, the polished grandeur, the towering structure, but nothing felt the same. The silence, once suffocating, now seemed expectant. Mr. Freeman the butler greeted her with a stunned, reverent blink, stepping aside with a slight bow. "Miss Stone." He said, the respect in his voice unmistakable. "Welcome back." "Thank you," Aurora replied, walking past the polished marble foyer and the towering chandelier. She could immediately hear small, quick, uncoordinated footsteps from upstairs, followed by a triumphant shout. "She's here." Beau rounded the staircase, first, arms flung open, his grin ear to ear. Jackson followed close behind, slower, but his eyes bright and clutching a sketchbook like a precious shield. Aurora knelt just in time to catch Beau in her arms, laughing softly into his curls. "Well, hello," she murmured. "Jackson and I made a welcome back sign," Jackson mumbled, thrusting the sketchbook at her. On the first page was a wobbly drawing of her, the 2 boys, and the Hamptons house, with a big heart drawn over it. The caption, scrawled in an eager child's hand, read, "You stayed even when you left." Aurora's throat tightened with emotion. "That's beautiful, honey, thank you." Footsteps approached behind them, heavy yet hesitant. Julian stood at the base of the stairs in a soft gray sweater and jeans, a stark departure from his usual starched suits. He looked like someone earnestly trying to be present, not merely pretending. "Breakfast is ready," he announced. Aurora stood smoothing her simple blouse. "Good, because we have rules to rewrite?" In the immense kitchen, the four of them gathered around the table. No phones, no hovering staff, just a bowl of scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh orange juice, a rare, intimate setting. Aurora pulled out a notebook and began. "We're going to talk about what it means to live here together, what's fair, what's safe, and what makes this house feel like a home." Jackson immediately raised a hand. "Can we have music during bath time?" Aurora nodded. "Reasonable." Bo added with a twinkle in his eye, "And no broccoli unless it's disguised." Julian coughed a suppressed laugh. "I may need clarification on that one." Aurora smiled. "We'll keep a list, but this isn't just about vegetables, it's about boundaries." She looked pointedly at Julian. "For all of us." He nodded, his expression serious now. "Understood." Over the next hour, the boys scribbled rules in crayon, always knock. No yelling near bedtime. Hugs must be asked for. Pancakes on Sundays. One story each before lights out. Aurora wrote down her own "listen first," apologize when you're wrong. No cameras, no exceptions. Julian, embodying his commitment to change, added a line in neat, decisive handwriting. "Make space for forgiveness, even when it's hard." When they were done, Aurora taped the paper to the refrigerator with 2 smiling sun magnets. "The new rules of the house," she declared. Later, while the boys played outside under the great oak tree, Julian found Aurora in the library sorting through children's books. "They've changed since you were gone," he observed, watching her. She glanced up. Or maybe they were always capable of it, and no one gave them the space. "I've changed, too," he admitted, his voice more hesitant, less assured. She held his gaze. "I believe that." He stepped closer, the atmosphere thick with the unspoken gravity of the past. "What you did, staying, leaving, coming back, that's more than I deserved." Aurora stood placing the last book on the shelf. "Maybe, but it's what they deserved, and I wasn't going to let your mistake be their only lesson." He flinched slightly, accepting the harsh truth, but nodded. "I want to be better." "Then start by being present, really present. Not just when it's easy." Julian looked down, shame crossing his face. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" Aurora softened, recognizing the genuine torment. "They already have. Kids are better at that than adults, but you have to earn it every day." That evening, Julian tucked the boys into bed, reading from a storybook, badly mispronouncing words, a genuine, clumsy effort. Aurora stood by the door, listening as the boys giggled, corrected him, and then asked for one more page, a sign of pure, easy connection. After lights out, Julian walked Aurora to the front hallway. "I was thinking," he said quietly, "about what you said, about not being staff, about being more." Aurora crossed her arms gently, a slight guard remaining. "You're not going to offer me a promotion, are you?" He smiled faintly. "No, I was going to offer you a voice. I want you to help me build something. Not just for them, but for other kids like them. Kids who've lost something, someone." Aurora's eyes widened, grasping the magnitude of the commitment. "A foundation." He nodded. "Something real. You guide it. I'll fund it." She stared at him for a long moment, then said, "If we do this, it's on our terms. No media circus, no image philanthropy." "Agreed." She extended her hand. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Sterling." He shook at a business exchange, sealing a personal promise. "Call me Julian." She smiled. "All right, Julian." That night, as she walked to the guest room, her own designated space no longer just a temporary bed, She paused outside the boys' room. From within, a whisper confirmed everything. "She came back," Bo said. "I told you," Jackson replied, and Aurora, leaning gently against the doorframe, whispered back to herself, "I did." The fragile peace was hard won, but it was theirs. However, the external world was already moving against their fragile reconstruction. Julian received a discreet email notification late that Friday night. Custody hearing, notice of motion. Senator and Mrs. Kennedy, the maternal grandparents, had filed for temporary guardianship, citing unfitness, emotional instability, and the very specific grounds of domestic incident, the slap. They had been watching, waiting for a moment of weakness, hoping to rip the boys away just as stability was finally achieved. The Federal Court of Manhattan courthouse smelled sharply of polished marble and cold, concentrated nerves. Its grand columns loomed like silent, unyielding judges. Aurora sat beside Julian in the waiting area, both dressed in muted, respectful tones. He in a tailored gray suit that belied the turmoil within, she in a soft navy dress with sleeves long enough to cover the faint, fading scar on her wrist. The legacy of a night Jackson and Bo had both suffered severe nightmares. Julian glanced sideways at her, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Nervous. Aurora kept her gaze fixed forward, straight and steady. Only about what I can't control. Across the room sat the opposition senator and Mrs. Kennedy, draped in affluence like armor. Mrs. Kennedy wore pearls, a perfectly pressed cream skirt suit, and the kind of disapproving stare that could curdle milk. The senator looked less composed, his hand twitching against his cane, his eyes darting toward Julian with barely concealed contempt. They had not acknowledged Aurora, not once refusing to grant her presence any legitimacy. The door to courtroom 5 opened and the clerk called them in. Aurora straightened her shoulders and whispered only to herself, "This is for Jackson and Bo." Inside the courtroom felt colder and more formal than the hallway. The judge sat perched behind a tall bench, an older woman with silver hair swept into a tight bun, reading glasses hanging from a chain. Her nameplate read, "Honorable Justice Sotomayor." Julian's lawyer stood first, speaking of the sudden loss of Victoria Sterling, the family's struggle to rebuild, and Julian's recent committed efforts to stabilize the home, highlighting the children's consistent progress and most notably the crucial presence of Aurora Stone. Then Mrs. Kennedy took the stand. Her voice, though polished and practiced, trembled with calculated indignation. "We only want what's best for our grandchildren," she insisted. "What kind of example is a man who hires an unqualified stranger to raise his children? A man who, by his own admission, struck this woman in his own home?" Aurora didn't flinch, though her cheek burned at the memory. "And she isn't even family," Mrs. Kennedy added, her voice tightening with class-based disdain. Justice Sotomayor raised a measured eyebrow. "Miss Stone isn't on trial, Mrs. Kennedy. But her presence is the issue," Mrs. Kennedy insisted, leaning into the microphone. "Julian can't care for the boys without outsourcing their emotional needs to someone else, someone temporary, unrelated, improperly trained. She has no degrees, no license." The judge turned her gaze directly to Aurora. "Miss Stone, do you wish to respond?" Aurora stood and approached the bench. She carried no notes. She didn't need them. Her testimony was etched in her history. "I don't have a degree in child psychology." She began, her voice steadying the moment she started speaking the truth. "But I have lived through more pain than I'd wish on anyone, and I know exactly what it looks like when children stop believing they're safe." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "When I arrived, Jackson and Bo didn't speak to anyone but each other. They didn't sleep. They didn't trust. Not their father, not the staff, not even themselves. But little by little, they let me in. And not because I'm special, but because I stayed. Because I didn't run when it got hard. Because I looked them in the eye and said, 'You matter.'" She met Mrs. Kennedy's unwavering gaze, then the senator's. You say I'm unqualified, but what qualifies someone to love children who aren't theirs, to choose them every day without obligation? Because that's what I've done. Not for a paycheck, not for praise, but because someone needed to. Justice Sotomayor leaned back, her expression unreadable, letting the raw, uncomfortable truth fill the courtroom. Thank you, Miss Stone. Aurora returned to her seat. Julian immediately reached under the table and gently squeezed her hand, a silent but profound acknowledgement of the strength she had just displayed. The power had shifted entirely. Later, Justice Sotomayor addressed the courtroom. This court does not take custody challenges lightly, especially when initiated by extended family against a surviving parent. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, it is clear that while Mr. Sterling has made mistakes, significant ones, he has also taken meaningful, consistent steps toward healing his family. The boys are thriving under his care, in large part due to the support of Miss Stone. She glanced toward the Kennedys. This court sees no grounds to remove custody from Mr. Sterling. Petition denied. A sharp gasp escaped Mrs. Kennedy, followed by a rustle as she stood to protest, but the senator placed a firm hand on her wrist. "Let it go," he whispered. Aurora sat still. Her heart hammered, but her face remained composed and resolute. Outside in the cool autumn air of Manhattan, Julian turned to her, his relief immense. "You saved them again." Aurora shook her head. "No, Julian, you did. You stood up. You stayed in the room." That night, as they tucked the boys in, Julian stood in the doorway watching Aurora hum them to sleep. When she stepped into the hallway, he said quietly, "I've never been good at saying thank you." "Then don't," she replied. "Just keep showing up." He nodded, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "Tomorrow," he said, the promise solid, "we begin building that foundation. I already have architects scheduled." She smiled. "And the name Abres." He paused, then said with deliberate clarity, "The Sterling Stone Resilience Center." Aurora blinked, genuinely caught off guard by the profound inclusion of her name. "That's a lot." "It's true," he said. "You built it with us. It's—" She looked past him to the room where the boys now slept without fear. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of everything. The first board meeting of the Sterling Stone Resilience Center was held not in a glass-walled high-rise or a formal ballroom, but in the sunroom of the Sterling estate in the Hamptons. The furniture was comfortably mismatched, the coffee slightly burnt, and one of the twins had left a crayon drawing taped to the window, a lopsided tree, with the word home scrawled above it. Aurora Stone sat at the head of the long table, fingers laced around a ceramic mug, her expression steady and alert. Julian was to her left, dressed down in jeans and a button-up shirt with rolled sleeves, a visual representation of his shift from remote CEO to hands-on partner. He didn't try to dominate the room. He listened intently, taking notes in a leather-bound pad. Across from them sat three prospective partners: Dr. Viola, a retired child therapist, Mr. Chance, an outreach coordinator from a local foster program, and Hudson D., a tech investor who was one of Julian's oldest, if not most, skeptical friends. Hudson D. pushed up his wireframe glasses. "So let me get this straight. You want to build a space for children who've been through trauma, but it's not a clinic, not a shelter, and not adoption-focused." Aurora offered a concise correction. "It's a third place, a sanctuary, a bridge between where they are and where they want to be." Dr. Viola leaned forward, intrigued. "Who staffs it?" "People like me," Aurora said firmly. "Not just credentialed experts, but survivors, mentors, adults who've lived through the fire and can teach others how to walk through it." Mr. Chance scribbled something in his notebook. "And how do you plan to handle funding, oversight, and liability?" Julian gently cut in, taking over the logistics. "We'll handle the structure and budget. Aurora will lead the heart." Hudson D. blinked. "And the name stays." Aurora smiled, resolute. "Yes, it stays." By the end of the hour, Dr. Viola had agreed to join as clinical advisor. Mr. Chance offered his agency connections, and Hudson D., after a long sigh and a muttered, "This is either brilliant or doomed," agreed to fund the first 6 months of programming. When the others left, Aurora stayed behind to clean up, driven by the ingrained habit of self-sufficiency. Julian stood at the doorway watching her. "You handled that like a seasoned executive," he commented. "I taught middle schoolers for 3 years." She replied, smirking. "Boardrooms don't scare me." He stepped into the room, his voice dropping slightly. "You were amazing." She didn't answer right away, staring instead at the crayon drawing on the window. "You know," she said softly, "when I was growing up, I moved 12 times, 12 different homes. None of them ever felt like mine." Julian followed her gaze, understanding the depth of her drive. "That's why this matters so much," she nodded. "Kids need roots and wings." Later that day, Jackson and Bo helped Aurora unpack boxes of art supplies for the center's temporary setup in the East Wing. Jackson carefully stacked jars of paint, while Bo sorted brushes by size. "Do we get to come here too?" Bo asked. "This is your home," Aurora said. "So yes, you get to help make it better for others." Jackson looked up. "Can we teach them our rules?" Aurora knelt beside him. "I think that's a great idea." They spent the afternoon creating a new colorful version of the house rules, complete with illustrations of smiling suns and stick figure families. Meanwhile, in the main house, Julian made a profoundly difficult phone call. He had spoken to his lawyer that morning. There was no legal requirement to include Aurora in any parental decision-making. She had no official custody. But as he looked through the window at the way she knelt beside his children, he realized something deeper than legality. She was already family. He picked up the phone. "Justice Sotomayor, please. Tell her it's Julian Sterling." 2 weeks later, Aurora received a large official envelope in the mail. It came with a short handwritten note from Julian. "No more temporary. No more blurred lines. You deserve the title you've already earned." Inside was a formal appointment document naming her co-director of the foundation and legal guardian in the event of his absence. Attached was a notarized petition Julian formally requesting shared guardianship of Jackson and Bo, with Aurora as co-signer. Aurora read the document 3 times before her hands began to shake. She hadn't asked for it. She hadn't even consciously imagined it. But somehow it was exactly what she'd always wanted, without knowing the name for it. Permanence. That night, she sat with Julian on the back porch, the boys asleep upstairs, a fire crackling gently in the outdoor hearth. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but I needed to." She turned to him. "Why now?" "Because they deserve permanence," he said. "And so do you." She blinked away sudden sharp tears. "I'm not perfect." "Neither am I," he said, meeting her gaze steadily. "But they don't need perfect. They need present. And you've never left." She reached for his hand across the porch railing. He didn't flinch this time. He held it overhead, firm and warm. A soft wind stirred the branches of the great oak tree. And for the first time in a very long time, Aurora Stone felt something deep and sacred settle inside her. Something she once thought she'd never feel again. Home. Aurora Stone never expected to see her mother again. She certainly didn't expect her to show up unannounced at the formidable front gate of the Sterling estate on a quiet Monday afternoon, wearing a weathered denim jacket and eyes that still carried far too many unsaid painful things. Aurora was in the middle of organizing educational materials for the Sterling Stone Resilience Center's upcoming open house, laminated behavior charts, name tags, posters when the intercom buzzed. Julian, who was in the foyer, answered the call. "There's a woman here," he said, turning to Aurora, his voice cautious. "Says she's your mother, Delilah Stone." Aurora froze instantly. Her hands, which had been deftly sorting the therapy cards labeled "Trust, Forgive, Safe" for the twins, suddenly felt too heavy to move. She's here. Aurora asked, her voice barely audible, the shock of the past bubbling to the surface. Julian nodded slowly, sensing the profound gravity of the moment. I can send her away immediately. Aurora stared down at the stack of flashcards in her hands, her carefully constructed composure threatened by this ghost from her past. "No," she finally said. "Let her in." Delilah Stone stood just inside the marble doorway of the mansion like someone waiting for an inescapable judgment. Her hands nervously twisted the strap of her handbag, and her gaze darted around the grand foyer, clearly unsure what kind of daughter built a life like this, so distant from her own. Aurora met her eyes with a controlled mixture of weariness and steel. "Hey, Mama." "I wasn't sure you'd remember me." Delilah said, her voice gravelly from time and likely cigarettes. Aurora folded her arms, maintaining distance. "It's not something you forget." They sat in the sunroom, Aurora on one end of the plush couch, Delilah on the other, with a gulf defined by years of pain, abandonment, and silence stretched between them. "I heard your name," Delilah began. "Some woman at church said you were in the news. Something about a center. Your face was in the paper." Aurora offered no response. "I was proud," Delilah added softly, the confession clearly difficult. "But I knew you wouldn't want to hear that." Aurora tilted her head, pressing the core question. Why now? Why after all these years? Delilah's eyes watered, and for a fleeting moment, Aurora saw a crack in the emotional mask her mother wore. "Because I'm sick," Delilah whispered, the admission of vulnerability hanging heavy in the air, "and because I was wrong." That caught Aurora completely off guard, the rare acknowledgement of failure landing with force. "I didn't know how to be a mother," Delilah confessed. "I was drowning in my own pain. Your father, he broke more than just furniture. And when he left, I didn't know how to hold anything together, not even you." Aurora swallowed hard, the sharp memory of being left at age 11, stinging her throat. "I waited for years for you to come find me." "I know," Delilah said, wiping quickly at her face. "I failed you." Silence returned heavy with the weight of that failure. Then Aurora asked the inevitable question, shifting the focus forward. "Do you want to meet the boys?" Delilah looked up sharply, her eyes wide. "You have children." "Not mine by blood," Aurora clarified, her voice firm with conviction. "But they're mine in every way that counts." Delilah hesitated, her insecurity showing. Would they like me?" Aurora looked out the window where Jackson and Bo were chasing each other with paper airplanes, their laughter rising like a new form of music. "They don't know you," she said honestly, "but I'll tell them the truth, that you're trying." Later that evening, Aurora sat at the edge of the boys' bed as they peppered her with questions. "She's your mom," Jackson asked, incredulous. "Why haven't we met her before?" Bo chimed in. "Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," Aurora said gently. "Big ones. Ones that take a long time to fix." Jackson, clutching his stuffed tiger, asked, "Is she gonna stay here?" "Not right now," Aurora assured him. "But she wants to get to know you slowly, if you're okay with that." Bo looked thoughtful, processing the complexity. "Only if she plays Uno with us." Aurora laughed, the permission granted. "I'll let her know." Downstairs, Julian waited in the kitchen. "How'd it go?" "They're curious," Aurora admitted. "More open than I expected." Julian poured her a cup of tea, his concern evident. "Are you okay?" Aurora took the cup, holding its warmth close. "I'm not sure," she said honestly, "but I think I want to try for closure, maybe even healing." Julian nodded, respecting her choice. "You're braver than most." She looked at him, acknowledging his support. "You make it easier." Over the next few days, Delilah visited the estate in short, measured doses. She sat with the twins under the big oak tree while they patiently explained the house rules and showed her the feeling chart Aurora had created. At first, Delilah seemed stiff, uncertain of her role, but slowly she began to soften. She brought simple, specific stories from Aurora's childhood, the good ones, the ones Aurora had almost forgotten. She brought cookies that crumbled too much, but tasted genuinely like Sunday mornings. One evening, Aurora sat with Delilah in the library, flipping through one of the old photo albums Delilah had brought. "You used to hum that same lullaby you sing to the boys," Delilah said. "You were 3, wouldn't sleep without it." Aurora blinked, caught off guard by the memory. "I thought I made that tune up." "You didn't. You remembered it, even when you forgot me." Silence fell thick with the shared history. Then Delilah reached into her bag and pulled out a small, tarnished box. Inside was a simple bracelet with a charm in the shape of a bird. "I bought this the day you were born," she said, "but I never gave it to you." Aurora held it gently, her fingers brushing the charm. "Why a bird?" "Because I knew you'd fly someday. I just didn't know how far." Aurora didn't cry then. But later, in the quiet of her own room with the bracelet on her wrist and the moonlight casting soft shadows, she let the tears come. She realized that healing wasn't a final destination. It was 1,000 small, painful decisions to open the door again to try to forgive not just others, but the child she had been. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Fall had arrived, bringing subtle whispers and a golden light that lingered longer in the mornings. At the Sterling Stone Resilience Center, preparations for the inaugural Healing Weekend Retreat were in full swing. Aurora stood at the whiteboard in the newly renovated community room, mapping out the schedule with color-coded markers, while Jackson and Bo folded blankets nearby. Julian passed by with a clipboard and a playful grin. "You do realize none of these kids will follow a color-coded schedule, right?" Aurora shot him a playful glare. "They won't know it's color-coded, but I will. It keeps me sane." He laughed easily, and for a moment everything felt light-settled. But Aurora knew that growth always brought friction. Healing scraped against the walls of old wounds, and that friction arrived fast. It started with a phone call from Mr. Chance, their liaison with the local foster agency. "Aurora, we have a complication," he said, his voice tense. "What kind of complication?" "There's a girl 16 named Skylar J. She's been placed in 5 homes in the past year. Everyone ended badly. She's smart, scary, smart, but guarded. She's refusing therapy, won't go to group sessions, and now she's refusing to stay in the system altogether." Aurora listened quietly, her professional instinct kicking in. "Mr. Chance continued, her social worker thinks your center might be her last shot before she ends up in juvenile detention. But she's volatile, Aurora. I won't lie to you. This isn't a sunshine story." Aurora took a deep, deliberate breath, recognizing the profound challenge. "Bring her in." Skylar J. arrived with a single duffel bag, worn combat boots, and an impenetrable wall of silence. Her hair was dyed a defiant shade of cobalt blue, and her arms were folded tight across her chest like an iron shield. She didn't speak during orientation, didn't make eye contact, and made it very clear verbally that she didn't need saving from anyone. Bo, who was cautiously observing from the doorway, whispered to Jackson, "She looks like she could beat up Spider-Man." Aurora knew that confrontation would only harden Skylar J's defense. That evening, while the other teens played board games, Aurora found Skylar J in the corner of the art room, sketching furiously into a notebook. "Mind if I sit?" Aurora asked gently. Skylar J shrugged without looking up. "Free country." Aurora sat quietly, not pushing. "What are you drawing?" Skylar J kept her gaze down. "People. Anyone I'd know. No one you'd understand." There was no bitterness in her tone, just distance and a statement of fact. Aurora nodded. "Fair enough." They sat in silence for several minutes. Aurora didn't pry. Instead, she pulled a notepad from her own bag and started sketching clumsily beside her. The act of drawing the act of sitting with Skylar J as an equal spoke louder than any counseling session could. Eventually, Skylar J asked, her voice low, "Why are you even doing this? This or this center, all of it?" Aurora paused, looking at the girl. "Because I used to be the kid no one knew what to do with, and someone chose to see me anyway." Skylar J glanced at her for the first time, a flicker of guarded interest in her blue eyes. "Just a flicker." "But enough," Skylar J said quietly. "You get one shot." "I know." Over the next few days, Skylar J didn't miraculously transform, but the small changes were visible. She stopped cursing during mealtime. She joined a group hike, though she walked defiantly at the back. And on the third night, she let out an accidental burst of genuine joy during a card game with Jackson and Julian. Aurora noticed everything, but Julian noticed something else. "You see the way she watches you," he said one evening as they folded linens. "She's suspicious," Aurora replied. "She's attached," Julian countered, his tone serious, "and that's dangerous." Aurora set down the towel, recognizing the familiar warning. "You think I'm making the same mistake I made with the twins?" "I think you need to protect your own heart," he said softly. She nodded. "That's not what this job is about." "I know." Julian said the words carrying the weight of his own painful past. "But if you give too much and she leaves..." She won't leave," Aurora asserted, though the words weighed heavier than she expected. Julian looked at her, his eyes somber. "They always leave, Aurora. You said that once, remember." She stared back. "Then maybe this time we don't let her." The retreat continued. On the last evening, Skylar J stood in the shadows as the group gathered in the garden. But when Aurora spoke, sharing her own story of sleeping in strangers' homes and being told she was too angry to be loved, Skylar J stepped closer. "You talk too much," she muttered under her breath. Aurora smiled. "So I've been told." Then Skylar J said quietly, "I used to draw birds before, when things were better." Aurora turned toward her. "You still can." That night, after lights out, Skylar J knocked softly on Aurora's door. I don't want to go back," she said, her voice cracking with raw vulnerability. "To the group home or anywhere else. This place, it doesn't feel fake." Aurora stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then stay. Let's find a way to make this home." Skylar J nodded, wiping her eyes with her hoodie sleeve. As she turned to leave, Aurora whispered, "You're not too much. You're just right, and we see you." That was all Skylar J needed. The final quiet promise whispered through an open door confirmed that healing didn't always arrive with an epiphany. Sometimes it arrived through the sustained, consistent choice to see and to stay. It began with a single headline, a small blip in the corner of a local online paper, but potent enough to send a cold shiver down Aurora's spine. Local millionaires foster program under scrutiny, allegations of improper staffing. The article was thin on verifiable details, but thick with damaging implications, suggesting that the Sterling Stone Resilience Center was a well-intentioned, poorly managed operation. It implied Aurora was unlicensed and unqualified, and hinted that Julian used his wealth to bypass crucial regulations. Julian was immediately furious. Aurora, however, was silent. She reread the article, her fingers gripping the tablet so hard the screen dimmed from pressure. "This is a smear job," Julian growled, pacing the study. "Someone's trying to sink us." "Someone who knows we're making progress," Aurora said quietly, understanding the threat was personal. The next day, Mr. Chance called, his voice grave. "Aurora, I'm getting calls from the agency. They're asking if you're operating with certified trauma counselors, if your background checks are current. This isn't just gossip anymore. It's turning into a formal investigation." Aurora closed her eyes, recognizing the danger. How bad? Bad enough. They're talking about pulling kids out of the center, even Skylar J. That hit harder than any personal attack. No, Aurora said firmly. They can't take her. She's only just beginning to trust. Mr. Chance sighed. You need to fight this. Quietly. Shore up your defenses fast. Aurora hung up and went straight to Julian. They're coming for us, she stated. And if we don't get ahead of it, they'll take the kids, the funding, everything. Julian leaned forward. We'll bring in outside consultants, auditors. I'll get Dr. Viola to review every policy. This is a hit job, Julian. It's personnel, Aurora insisted. Someone who knows our structure, our timeline. Julian's jaw clenched. He suspected his old business rival. They wouldn't play quiet like this, Aurora said. This feels closer. Later that night, as the rain lashed against the windows of the center's office, Aurora went through the personnel files searching for a weak link, a mistake they might have missed. Then she saw it. Skylar J's intake form. One signature was slightly off. The social worker listed wasn't the one Mr. Chance had assigned. The paper had been scanned through an older printer from an agency they hadn't worked with in over a year. Aurora's heart dropped. Someone had forged the paperwork. This is going to sound crazy. She immediately told Mr. Chance on the phone, but I think someone tampered with Skylar J's file. Mr. Chance pulled up the records on his end. Wait, this isn't our file. Where did this come from? I don't know, Aurora said, her voice tight, but someone planted it. Mr. Chance was silent. Then you need to get ahead of this now. The next morning, Aurora called an emergency board meeting. Dr. Viola Hudson. Mr. Chance and Julian sat at the long table, the tension thick and palpable. Aurora laid the forged document on the table. This is the weapon they're using against us, she said. Dr. Viola frowned. If an audit reveals a forged placement, they'll shut us down on grounds of negligence, even if we didn't know. Mr. Chance sighed, frustrated. Someone targeted Skylar J because she's the easiest to discredit. If they can claim we failed her, they can unravel the entire center. Julian stood. Then we don't give them the chance. We go to the press first, tell the story ourselves. Hudson D. raised an eyebrow. You want to publicize a forgery that's risky. Aurora shook her head firmly. Not just the forgery, the truth. We tell them who Skylar J is, why she came here, what she's become. Dr. Viola looked worried. You'd be putting her at the center of a media storm. I'll ask her first. Aurora said, her stance unwavering. She gets to choose. That evening, Aurora found Skylar J in the art room painting a massive canvas, a golden bird breaking free of tangled ropes. Can I talk to you? Aurora asked. Skylar J kept painting. They're trying to send me back, aren't they? Yes. Are you going to let them? Aurora stepped closer, explaining the situation honestly, carefully. I won't put you in the spotlight unless you say yes. When she finished, Skylar J set down her brush. You told me once I wasn't too much, that I was just right. Aurora nodded. Then let's show them who I am. Skylar J said, her voice steady and brave. Let them see me. The next day, Aurora stood in front of a group of reporters, Julian beside her, Mr. Chance and Dr. Viola behind, and Skylar J, brave and centered, stood in front of the microphones. My name is Skylar J. I'm 16. I've lived in 10 foster homes in 4 years. I've been called unfixable, volatile, dangerous. But here, someone saw me. Someone stayed, and I started to believe I might matter again. Her voice didn't waver. I'm not a case number. I'm not a mistake. I'm a girl who paints birds because I forgot how to fly, and now I'm learning again. Aurora stood tall, proud. The cameras flashed. The questions came, but the tide had shifted. Truth once buried had a way of rising, and this time it came with wings. The fallout from the press conference wasn't an immediate explosion, but a relentless, draining pressure. For 3 straight days, the media camped outside the Hamptons estate gates. Skylar J. didn't flinch. If anything, she grew stronger. The center released her powerful bird painting as part of their statement, a true gallery of resilience. Her voice echoed far beyond the local community, reaching state-level organizations. Anonymous attacks followed, calling Aurora a well-meaning fraud and questioning Julian's decision to trust empathy without structure. Aurora absorbed the attacks in silence, leaning on her inner strength, until one morning a handwritten letter arrived unsigned. Inside was a single line. "You saved my daughter when I couldn't. Thank you." It was enough. At breakfast, Jackson and Beau were giggling over cereal. Julian folded the newspaper and met Aurora's eyes across the table. "You're holding up." "I have to," she said. "Not just for them," he added. "For you." She hesitated, then nodded. "For me, too." That day, Aurora addressed the full staff. "I won't apologize for our mission," she declared. "We didn't build this center to look good. We built it because kids fall through cracks, and we decided to stand in those cracks and catch them." The team led by Dr. Viola reaffirmed their commitment. "We stay." One evening, Julian came home with a subtle shift in his demeanor. Aurora, with her finely tuned sense of tension, immediately felt the ripple beneath the calm. That night over dinner, Julian asked, "Did you ever go by another name?" Aurora blinked, setting her fork down. "Why are you asking me that?" He hesitated. "I got an anonymous letter. It suggested you might not be fully forthcoming." Aurora stood up slowly. "Do you believe it?" Julian looked up, his face a field of conflict, not certainty. "I believe you. I do. But I had to ask." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I was Aurora Reyes until I turned 18. Then I took my grandmother's surname, Stone, because my father didn't earn the right to name me." Julian nodded, shame crawling up his spine. "I'm sorry." "I'm not ashamed of who I was," Aurora continued. "But I am angry that someone thinks they can weaponize my past." Julian spent the following day alone in his office, not managing assets, but digging. He ran every background check, cross-referenced every record. He needed to be able to prove the truth to the world. 2 days later, the past materialized fully. Aurora didn't recognize the man at first. He was tall, gaunt, dressed in a cheap tan blazer, standing nervously by the center's front desk. His face was obscured by a baseball cap, but something in his posture stirred a buried cold stillness in Aurora's chest. Dr. Viola waved Aurora over. "He says he's here to speak with you." He didn't give a name. "Can I help you?" Aurora asked cautiously. The man looked up. 20 years collapsed. "Aurora," he said, voice weathered, uncertain. "It's me, your father." Time stopped. "You don't get to say my name," she said, voice low. He took off his cap. "I shouldn't be here. I saw the press conference. I saw you and I had to come." Julian arrived, sensing the high tension. "Is this man bothering you?" he asked. Aurora kept her gaze locked on her father. "I don't know." Julian quietly stepped back, staying close. "I'm not here to ruin anything," her father said. "I don't want money. I just wanted to see if you were okay." Aurora let out a slow breath. "You left when I was 10, when Mom had her breakdown, when everything fell apart." "I was sick, Aurora," he whispered. "Addicted, lost. I didn't know how to stay." "That's not an excuse," she said. "It's a fact, but it doesn't erase what happened." He nodded, shame curling his shoulders. He pulled out a faded photo, a girl in overalls with braids squinting into the sun. "You left this on the porch the day I drove away. I kept it." He confessed to 2 years of sobriety. "I want grace." "I can't promise that," she said, "but I can promise not to hate you anymore." He wept silently. "That's everything." That night, Julian found Aurora in the sunroom. "He came," she said. "It was like talking to a ghost I've been angry at for so long I forgot I was still haunted." "Do you want him in your life?" Julian asked. I don't know, she said honestly, but I wanted him to see me, that's all. Julian reached across and took her hand. You're seen, he said simply. 2 days later, Julian walked up the front steps of the center as Aurora was closing up. He held up a folder. Background checks, old records, everything you've ever submitted. His face was serious. It's clean. She raised an eyebrow. You doubted that. He shook his head. I just needed to prove to the world what I already knew. She stepped toward him. And what do you know, Julian Sterling? That your past makes you powerful, not dangerous. Later that evening, the boys asleep, Julian found Aurora in the sunroom. I wanted to ask, he said, closing the door softly, would you marry me? She looked up stunned, not because of the question, but because he said it now softly in a way that wasn't a proposal, but a profound promise. She closed her sketchbook and pressed it to her chest. Then she said, yes, but only if you know I'm not perfect. He brushed her hair out of her face. Neither am I, but we're better at growing together. Outside, the wind rustled through the great oak tree. Healing had become inheritance. They were all different, broken, reassembled, stitched together with shared pain and rebuilt hope. They were whole not because they'd erased the cracks, but because they'd filled them with gold kintsugi. And in that moment, Aurora Stone felt rooted and flying all at once. The end of the story isn't the finish line, it's simply the point where the hard work of staying begins. We saw a powerful man choose to dismantle his own control and submit to the painful, humbling process of earning back respect. We saw a marginalized woman prove that dignity is the only thing truly worth inheriting. The real success here isn't the wealth. It's the fact that they took the wreckage of their lives and built a future based on persistence. This entire journey proves that being present is the most valuable, hardest-earned currency. We hope this real look at redemption and change resonated with you. Take a second and tell us, what's the weather like where you are right now? Is it cold and quiet or bright and warm? Let that simple answer be your connection to this difficult yet necessary victory. If you respect the honest fight, the messy work of real change, more than the polished ending, please hit the like button. Tap subscribe to stay in this community where we share narratives about earning trust and building lives back from the ground up. Thank you for watching. See you next time.